Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo's connection goes far beyond a film project. It did not form loudly or publicly. It grew quietly, under pressure, behind cameras, and in moments that were never meant to be shared. When Wicked was announced, the public focused on casting choices, debates, and expectations. Very few people noticed that two women from very different worlds were about to become emotional anchors for one another in an industry that rarely allows softness. Ariana entered the project as one of the most recognizable pop stars in the world. Every move she makes is watched, judged, and discussed. Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo's connection goes far beyond a film project. It did not form loudly or publicly. It grew quietly, under pressure, behind cameras, and in moments that were never meant to be shared. When Wicked was announced, the public focused on casting choices, debates, and expectations. Very few people noticed that two women from very different worlds were about to become emotional anchors for one another in an industry that rarely allows softness. Ariana entered the project as one of the most recognizable pop stars in the world. Every move she makes is watched, judged, and discussed. Cynthia's journey has been different. Her talent has never been questioned, but her acceptance has often been conditional. As promotion for Wicked began, reactions were divided, and much of the pressure landed on Cynthia. The criticism grew louder, the tone harsher, and the margin for mistakes almost non-existent. During this period, many people noticed a shift in Ariana's public presence. She was still there, still visible, but quieter than usual. In interviews, she spoke less and listened more. She allowed Cynthia to take the lead, never interrupting, never competing for attention. In an industry driven by spotlight and dominance, this kind of restraint stood out. It was not accidental, it was intentional. Cynthia, meanwhile, chose silence. She did not respond to every comment or defend herself against every narrative. She did not explain her emotions to strangers. Instead, she protected her energy. This silence was misread by many as arrogance or detachment, but in reality, it was discipline. In moments of intense scrutiny, choosing not to react can be an act of strength. The Singapore press tour marked a turning point. It was more than a promotional stop. It became an emotional test. The questions directed at Cynthia were heavier, more pointed, and often uncomfortable. Narratives had already been formed before she entered the room. Throughout it all, Ariana remained close, sometimes physically, sometimes through small gestures, quiet support, and steady presence. These moments were not always captured clearly on camera, but they were felt. What went largely unnoticed was how much Cynthia had already sacrificed. When Ariana faced criticism over her personal life, Cynthia stood by her. She defended her without seeking attention or praise. She absorbed backlash that was never meant to be hers. The cost of that loyalty was steep, and it came with little public recognition. As the situation unfolded, fans began choosing sides. Online conversations turned into comparisons, Team Ariana versus Team Cynthia. But this was never a competition, it was survival. Ariana had fame as armor, Cynthia had integrity and endurance. Each carried a different kind of weight, and neither path was easy. Wicked may be a fantasy on screen, but the real story unfolded off-screen. Two women navigating expectation, criticism, and pressure while holding space for one another. There was an unspoken agreement between them. Neither would let the other fall, even if it meant standing quietly in the background. Their body language told the story better than words ever could. Ariana leaning in during interviews, Cynthia visibly relaxing when Ariana was nearby. The subtle nods, the shared glances, the ease that cannot be rehearsed. This was not public relations. This was trust. Over time, the toll became visible. Cynthia appeared less frequently. Her online presence grew quieter. Observers labeled it as weakness, suggesting she could not handle fame. But stepping back is not always failure. Sometimes it is a deliberate choice to preserve peace in an environment that constantly demands emotional exposure. Ariana's support remained steady but understated. She did not make dramatic statements or position herself as a savior. She simply stayed. In an industry obsessed with visibility, quiet loyalty can be the most powerful gesture. Their bond was never romantic, strategic, or manufactured for headlines. It was sisterhood, the kind formed when two people understand the cost of existing in the same space and choose compassion over competition. It was built on shared pressure rather than shared publicity. Cynthia Erivo gave more than she received. She defended without explaining herself. She sacrificed without asking for recognition. That is why her role in this story is often misunderstood. Respect does not always come with applause. Sometimes it comes later, after the noise fades. As Wicked moves closer to release, it will represent more than a performance. It will stand as evidence of endurance, loyalty, and quiet strength. When audiences look beyond the spectacle and understand the journey behind it, the narrative may finally shift. Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo have shown that real bonds can exist in Hollywood, but they come at a cost. And often, the person who pays the highest price is the one who chooses silence over spectacle. As the conversation around Wicked grew louder, the pressure on both women became impossible to ignore. Every interview was dissected, every pause analyzed, every expression turned into a headline. Yet what stood out most was not what they said, but what they refused to perform. Neither Ariana nor Cynthia fed the drama. They did not correct every rumor or reshape every narrative. In a culture that rewards constant reaction, their restraint became its own statement. Cynthia, in particular, seemed to understand the cost of visibility. The more she spoke, the more her words were twisted. So she chose control over chaos. She limited access to herself not out of fear, but out of self-respect. This decision was never explained to the public, and that silence became a blank space where others projected their assumptions. Ariana, on the other hand, carried a different burden. Her fame meant that anything she did could easily overshadow Cynthia, even unintentionally. So she adjusted. She softened her presence, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. That kind of awareness is rare in an industry built on dominance. It signaled partnership rather than hierarchy. There were moments when their dynamic felt almost protective. Ariana would wait for Cynthia to finish speaking before responding. Cynthia would subtly redirect attention back to Ariana when praise leaned too heavily in one direction. These small exchanges revealed a balance they were actively maintaining, not for the audience, but for each other. What made this bond unusual was the absence of performance. There were no grand declarations of friendship, no viral sound bites designed to reassure fans. Instead, there was consistency, showing up together, standing together, leaving together. In an era of curated closeness, this quiet consistency felt real. Behind the scenes, the emotional labor was heavier than anyone realized. Cynthia carried the weight of representation and expectation. Ariana carried the responsibility of being visible without overpowering. Both roles came with scrutiny and both required constant self-monitoring. Yet neither publicly complained. They absorbed the impact privately. The backlash Cynthia faced began to shape public perception in ways that were deeply unfair. Her confidence was labeled as coldness. Her boundaries were framed as distance. What was missing from these narratives was context. Cynthia was not pulling away from the project, she was pulling herself back from unnecessary harm. Ariana's continued proximity challenged these narratives. If Cynthia were truly difficult or detached, Ariana would have distanced herself. Instead, she stayed close. Her presence quietly contradicted the assumptions being made. It suggested trust where the public imagined tension. Over time, this dynamic created discomfort for observers who wanted a clearer storyline. Heroes and villains are easier to understand than nuance. But Ariana and Cynthia refused to simplify their reality for consumption. Their relationship existed outside the framework of entertainment gossip. As the release date approaches, the focus will inevitably shift back to performances, vocals, and visuals, but for those paying attention, the real legacy of this collaboration may lie elsewhere. It may be found in the way two women protected each other without spectacle, without contracts, and without public credit. This story is not about perfection. It is about endurance. It is about choosing loyalty in an environment that profits from division. It is about knowing when to speak and when to remain silent, and understanding that both choices carry consequences. Cynthia Erivo's role in this narrative remains largely unacknowledged, but it is central. She stood firm when it would have been easier to explain herself. She absorbed criticism that did not belong to her. She protected someone else while struggling to protect herself. Ariana Grande's role was quieter than her star power would suggest. She did not dominate the space, she did not rewrite the narrative. She simply stayed present, proving that support does not need to be loud to be effective. Together, they offered a different model of collaboration, one built on respect rather than rivalry, on empathy rather than exposure, on restraint rather than reaction. This model may never trend, but it lasts longer than viral moments ever do. In the end, the bond between Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo is not defined by headlines or interviews. It is defined by what they carried for each other when no one was watching. And that is why, long after the noise fades, their connection will still matter.